Hello, Pittsburgh. I'm Megan Trotter, and this is TribLive's From the Newsroom podcast, bringing you the top stories from TribLive.com. Early Sunday morning, the South Side streets were host to hundreds of weekend revelers after the bars closed at 2 a.m. along East Carson Street. A hefty police presence awaited crowds, and a riot line formed to disperse them. At one point, gunfire rang out. Luckily, no one was injured. In recent weeks, city officials and Southside business owners alike have begun urging people to end their nights quickly after last call. TribLive reporter Justin Vellucci and I took a deeper look into the Southside on Sunday morning. We're here to discuss Sunday's crowds, the progress in slowing crime, and Southsider sentiment as this dispersal seems to be the start of a new weekly trend. Justin, I don't know if you want to get into it and kind of set the scene.
So Southside is sort of like there's unspoken code, right? Everyone knows the Southside is where the bars are, right? I think that even when the steel mills, where J&L was open on the Southside during World War II, that's where all the, shot in a beer bars that were open at, clocking out time at 9 a.m. That's where they were. And it's that way now. I mean, I think there's I think you and I said there was 50 active liquor licenses or something like that. And there's 20 something in that stretch that the entertainment patrol covers for sure.
Yeah. Kind of thinking back to Saturday into early Sunday morning, it kind of was a quiet night until things were not so quiet anymore. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit just about what you saw go down.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you and I were there last year and got a sense for things sort of, I mean, I don't know if calming down is the right way to describe it, but crime was definitely kind of tapering off, maybe. Yeah, I got the sense it was less violent crime. But yeah, there was something very different when the police seemed sort of like they were making a statement. It was like there was a presence and they wanted to make it known that there was a presence.
Yeah, I mean, we were there just this past weekend, but the riot lines have been forming for at least 2 weeks beforehand, so it's been an ongoing occurrence.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh police didn't call, which I hear is not all that common. Essentially, I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, where they pretty much like got on the scanner and said like everyone who's on like come here like right now, and they had officers from 3, 4, 5, 6 different departments, many of them in North Hills, who came out. But the weekend we were out this past Sunday, I believe it was all Pittsburgh police. They are not commenting or confirming on any numbers of how many people were out that night or how many people were in the rest of the city. Do you want to walk people through what happened when the shots rang out? I know you had a great perspective. You had some great views right there.
Yeah, it had been kind of quiet for 2 hours roughly. We had been out, maybe an hour and a half, a little bit closer to, and we were kind of just walking along one of the side walkways along the street, and all of a sudden there's like this massive movement of Pittsburgh police officers rushing kind of down the street toward Capos. And there's this rush of movement from the officers. They start like drawing out their weapons and everybody kind of starts like looking around and people kind of start to scatter a little bit. And the journalist in me is like, get towards the gunfire that's going on. So I start to run toward kind of alongside some of the police officers who were a little bit mainly in the street, and I'm running along next to them on the sidewalk. And I see Councilman Bob Charland kind of wide-eyed running the opposite direction. And I was just kind of thinking, I wonder what's going on in his head at that moment.
Yeah, I think he told city council on Monday he kind of chickened out. I mean, listen, you're a city councilman. You're an elected official. You represent lots of people. You're not used to, having to run from gunfire in your neighborhood. So I thought, it was interesting. He told me he was with Sergeant Robinson, who heads the entertainment patrol, and Robinson was making, a minor arrest. Maybe it was like a, possession of marijuana or something. And the shots rang out. They weren't clear if it was one or two. It looks like they got, one casing on the scene, but the witnesses said there were 2 shots. And like Charland just ran. And like apparently he was supposed to stick with Commander Abraham, Jeff Abraham. But Abraham, like, who's an administrator, I mean, he's like he's a step down from an assistant chief. Like the cop in him came out and he just like kind of went for it, So I think Charland was a little lost. I think he was a little out of his element. But kudos for him for going down there. I know there were a lot of people who were complaining or raising concerns from the week before. Obviously, it got a lot of traffic on social media.
Yeah, definitely. Just in talking to some of the business owners and bar owners in the area, there's kind of this concern about maybe what that media coverage in the area, because I mean, there were videos of riot lines forming and people being pushed out just in the past few weeks. And there was kind of this talk from people who own businesses in the area just about what that's doing for business, and kind of if it's creating this narrative that Southside is potentially unsafe. If, I mean, there were gunshots on Saturday night into Sunday, if there's a concern there about an increased police presence and about more people coming to the area over the summer. So it was an interesting conversation just in between police officers and just kind of even the business owners that are talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's a good conversation for folks like us in the media to have too. I think that, South Side for sure, downtown is another one. These are neighborhoods that really get placed under the microscope. So there are shootings in the city of Pittsburgh all the time. I mean, if you listen to the scanner, you could hear Shot Spotter going off all the time. But it's like when one happens in South Side or when a shooting happens downtown, like it's big headlines and it's, TV crews coming out. It's like a big thing. I know like talking, I think you could talk to Christy Miller too. She's really tapped into that, like this concern that perception feeds the number of crowds that come out, and then the number of crowds come out feed more violent crime or less violent crime. It's like a weird cycle.
Yeah, when I talked to Christy, she owns 12 Whiskey Barbecue and Dose Taqueria. She was actually mentioning that while it looks like there's a lot of people in the area who you would assume would be going into businesses and helping like the economy and creating a culture there that's like inside the bars and adding to businesses, the people are actually just kind of hanging out on the street. She said she doesn't know if it's necessarily people that are old enough to go into bars, but she was just saying that it looks like they're doing so much more business than they actually are. And that was kind of the sentiment of Mario's owner, Jimmy Hoffman, as well.
Yeah. I saw after the crowds, the police were clearing out businesses as the sort of line of, 24, 25, 26 officers, whatever it was, were sort of marching down the street, which was a real eerie sight. Like, I mean, I think a bunch of us have been going to Southside as, in our personal lives, not professionally, for a number of years. And to see, like, I mean, listen, it's a riot line. To see these cops forming and just physically trying to force people, like clearing out business, it's disorienting. I'd be curious also, I mean, did you have a thought on like the businesses closing? I know Bob Charland has talked about this idea that, was it La Bodega? I know they do a lot of business after 2, or Cambodia Kitchen. The idea that they might turn to these businesses and say, listen, last call, you're done. Like, do you have any thoughts on what that's going to do to the businesses there, or the economy, or the crowds that show up?
Yeah, in talking to some of the other business owners and bar owners in the area who close at 2, and that's like a firm line. They lock the doors and they're done for the night. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the places like Cambodia, who maybe stay open, I think, until roughly like 3 o'clock in the morning, whether or not they need to be open now that the rest of the district has closed. So I think it's definitely a conversation between the business owners, and I have heard from some of the business owners in the area that Councilman Charland has been talking with places like Cambodia that stay open later about potentially closing their doors earlier, which we saw on Saturday into Sunday night when, police are entering with their flashlights, kicking people out, making people go home, and are continuing that push just down toward 18th Street.
I know also the thing that's sort of interesting is that crime doesn't necessarily look like it's changed all that much. I know like the sort of storyline that formed in the summer of 24 was this kind of, wow, things are improving. And people now are giving this sort of, oh, look at Southside, the sort of the summer's coming and what's going to happen. And the numbers, I would say June over June look, this June versus last June look roughly the same. And a number of things were dropping. I want to say year over year too, right? The numbers were kind of the same or even down in some categories, right?
Right, yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see this need for an increased police presence in the area, because they had been doing the numbers in terms of at least violent crimes and things have been similar. So it's interesting that they would need to be pulling in as many police officers as they have been.
Yeah. Well, that also was the one thing that the police union obviously was pounding the table about. I know Robert Swartzwelder was talking about staffing levels. I mean, obviously, anyone who's read a website in Pittsburgh or watched a TV newscast in the last, 2-3 years knows that, staffing has been a big headache. A lot of people feel there are not enough cops just even walking the beat, doing the community policing, that sort of thing. The thought of having, 25 officers on duty, forming a riot line in Southside, like again, I don't mean to harp on this, but I specifically have asked, like Pittsburgh police, like how many police were there in the rest of the city? Like if there were a shooting in the East End, or there was a car accident, again, Swartzwelder brought this up. If there's a car accident somewhere, a real major one that requires roads to close, like there's not enough cops to handle it.
I'm curious to hear kind of, I know you had covered the after effects of like with the charges and everything. Could you talk a little bit about the charges and kind of like, what happened
Yeah, so I
Saturday into
mean the
Sunday?
shots went off. I think they said in the complaint it was like 2:04 a.m. I mean it was right after things were closing. They charged a woman from Forest Hills. I think she's 22, Alyssa Gore, I believe is her name. They know who she is. I mean, they claim they know who she is, and she is not in custody. I mean, there are a number of charges, including simple assault, that she's facing, but she was not in custody as of a few minutes ago when I checked the court records. In addition, there were two, I want to say two men who were arrested Sunday night into Monday. We know it was an establishment. We don't know if it was a bar or a club or a vape shop, but there were, someone had called the police and asked for help getting these people out. And like when the entertainment patrol showed up, like they said an officer had tased the one man. There's not a whole lot of information there. And then due to the police spokesperson said that due to the unruliness of the crowd, like they used pepper spray. They brought out the pepper spray, and that again is like one of those things that like a kind of line is crossed. When you think of Southside being sort of a place of debauchery or whatever, like the second you start talking about riot lines and tasing and pepper spray, like it sort of changes the narrative a little bit. I don't know.
I heard the similar sentiment also from Christy Miller. She was saying that while there's like all these people in the area, and yes, maybe they're not going into businesses and maybe they are underage and they're just kind of hanging out in the corner or smoking or eating or whatever it is, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong. They're just kind of in the area and being there. And while maybe it's disruptive to traffic or it's difficult to get everybody to disperse at the end of the night, she's curious as to what more police officers can be doing other than just clearing out the area.
Yeah. Robinson's been doing, I mean, I don't mean to sound like his promoter or anything, but he seems to have a real good handle on the, what businesses are doing what and who's going where. Like he really is doing an interesting job leading that patrol. But I think it sort of asks like you talk about these questions about what it means to Southside. Like I don't know if a turn like this, like where suddenly, like I said, that line is crossed and you're having pepper spray, crowds pepper sprayed and drunk people being forced out by riot lines. Like, does that hurt business? I know they're trying to sort of revitalize things and fill some of those storefronts that emptied out during the pandemic. But do you feel that like people would not go to the South Side or would not frequent businesses there because they're seeing this on the news or they're catching videos online?
I think that there's definitely a possibility, and I think that that's a concern that a lot of the business owners in the area expressed to me, is just that worry that yes, maybe one incident happened where there were gunshots Saturday into Sunday, but maybe that's not representative of a larger event.
Right.
And maybe the increased police numbers and the riot lines that we're seeing, at least the past 2 weekends, might be contributing to this narrative that Southside's not safe and that you shouldn't be going there, and that if you go there, then you're going to have a run-in with the police or potentially put yourself in some kind of danger.
Mm-hmm. This is probably the part where we should make sure we plug in Charland's comment. I mean, the councilman did confirm, Southside's in his district, that there were those 6 new businesses. These are, I think, bars and retail establishments, or 6 different businesses who've signed leases in that entertainment district, which again is East Carson Street from around 12th up to about 18th. So there are 6 new businesses in the last 2 or 3 months that have signed on to open up there. And he feels that things are kind of turning the corner. I mean, the thing that's interesting, we're talking about these riot lines and it sounds very scary, but I was St. Patrick's Day the last time there was a shot fired inside. I mean, I don't know offhand, but I can't think of a recent instance where shots were even fired in the Southside Flats.
Yeah, I think you're correct about that. Again, Southside is Southside, and when you're along a strip of bars that, they're dive bars, people, it's college kids or younger people that are going to hang out there. It's an entertainment district. What do you expect from an entertainment district other than drunk people in the street? You don't typically hear necessarily about specific violent crimes. It's not something that's happening on the daily basis in Southside.
No, and even and again, referring back to the stats, like when you look at violent crime numbers, I mean, it looks like drug arrests might be up slightly this summer or this June over June. I think that's where we saw the number change, or year to date. But it was interesting, like the weekend where there was, quote unquote chaos or unruliness or whatever you want to say. Like I'm pretty sure the police said they didn't recover like a single gun. Like they didn't seize a single gun off of someone without a license or someone who was up to no good. Which again speaks to this question of like, perception. Like, is it really a violent, dangerous place, or is it a place that just is kind of under the microscope because of the nature of it?
Right, and I'm thinking too just about the few hours before the gunshots on Saturday night when we were just hanging out on the street. It looked like people were just making their way in and out of the bars or the clubs. They were eating. Cops were seen just kind of hanging out on the corners, maybe providing extra like security assistance to certain establishments in the area, but there wasn't necessarily a intensity to this situation. But we saw there was an increased police cars everywhere,
For
definitely
sure.
an increase in numbers, but like they mostly were just hanging out until there was an issue.
Yeah. No, and I think that again, the police union, like they're talking, I mean, we're at a time right now, the former police chief, Larry Scarrato, really sort of trimmed it down to a skeleton staff between those hours of 3 and 7 a.m., where you really only have, I mean, like literally the offices for these zone stations are closed. Like they put blue phones outside because there's no one manning those stations. I mean, that's how quiet it is from the police perspective. But I'm curious how long they could continue to put, 25 officers throughout 5 blocks in East Carson Street, like every weekend, every Thursday, every Friday, every Saturday. I don't know how sustainable that is.
And it's interesting too because when we were there over the weekend, it took, I think, pretty much exactly an hour after last call at 2 a.m. when most of the establishments close, to get them from 14th down to 18th and do that complete sweep of the entertainment district block. So I'm curious if people aren't moving as quickly as what we saw Saturday night, early Sunday morning, if that's going to impact things, because that would be after that 3 a.m. area.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that, I think that, listen, Southside is a place where this stuff happens. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I'm just curious how they allot resources and what it means for the numbers. I as someone who's lived in Pittsburgh for a bunch of years, like, I mean, I don't know if I tip people stay away from the South Side or anything like that. But again, to see riot lines and tasings and pepper spray, it's disconcerting for sure. Well, Meg, I want to thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Justin, thank you for coming and talking to me today and working on the article.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I had a lot of fun coming on and look forward to continuing to stay out in the middle of the night, walking up and down East Carson Street, waiting for something to happen.
Stay tuned for more updates on Southside.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zach Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.